I would close as much as you possibly can and try to go back in. I would leave the meeting, close as much as you possibly can, or go to YouTube on your phone and listen through your phone.
How is this? Do I get this not to be full screen? Nothing.
Well, I never read that one, so I. Would you want to correct yourself at the next?
This is what they gave me, and I went, this isn't right.
Well, maybe we can get Julia to give you an update in the next 5 minutes. You can correct it. Did you want to correct it?
No, it's correct. What I
Testing,
read is
testing,
correct.
testing.
What you were reading was incorrect.
Oh, all those years?
All those.
Okay, I believe we've resolved the issue.
It was written for the city. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, we're back to our meeting and having a staff presentation on 117 Saxon Avenue.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Westman. Good evening, Commissioners. So we have a design permit for 117 Saxon Avenue. This is a remedy to some work that was done without the benefit of permit. I've got just an aerial just to give you some context. This is on the corner of Saxon Avenue and El Salto Drive. And a little more context, this building, according to our records, was originally built in 1910. It's noted as a 1.5 story. It's got this low profile dormer at the front. And the attic space is inside what you see as the steeper roof pitches. And so specifically, this is an area that covers 574 square feet. It's within the original constructed attic. And the background that we have more recently and what brings us to today and this permit request is in December of 2021, the city received a complaint about a window and privacy and whether or not this area was legal to be habitable, conditioned space. We did an investigation, dug up some records, both through the city and the county. We reached out to the owner in March of 2022. And the owner did not have any further records and we shared what we had and our findings. And I think after figuring out several of the paths forward, the owner agreed that filing a design permit was the way to go, hired a local designer and made a submittal in October 2022. So this is just a site plan view. The shaded tan area is the attic above. This is representative of the first floor and the site boundaries. And then this is what was that shaded area in the prior slide. So this is got essentially a vaulted and sloping ceiling throughout, runs along the cross length ridge of the roof. I'm going to use the pointer here. I'll point out those glass blocks that were in that front elevation that we looked at, the low profile dormer. And then here's the window that generated at least a portion of the original concern that was filed with the city. The window really is kind of the primary topic here because technically it's a design review, but we're not really looking at anything design related other than this window. We did some investigation, as noted, we were not able to date the window. So we don't really know if it was part of the original construction or if it was added with this modification. But where we landed in terms of a nexus and looking at this from a mitigation standpoint was that the area is being activated. And so it does present a new potential privacy issue. And so we are recommending a condition that the lower half of the window receive a treatment for privacy. That's condition number 13. So here is just a real life view of this window. It faces generally south toward the sea, and the property next door, most closest to the window, you can't even see the home here because it's the way that lot was developed. That home was really tight to the rear property line, so it has a bit of a view over what is the front yard. This is just a bit of cleanup on our recommended condition in preparing this slideshow today. took a closer look at this window, and there's actually 5 vertical divided lights. So the check rail, which is the bottom cross piece of the fixed window, the upper portion of the fixed window, there's only 2 divided lights in there, and there's 3 on the bottom. So bottom half is a little bit, would just present an immediate question for this condition. I added it in parentheses in the written condition in the staff report for clarification, but in fact, it makes it more confusing. So just want to modify that on record here and just say at the check rail and below.
So that would be all 3 pane,
Three.
horizontal. And that window opens.
Yeah, the 3 pane portion is operable. And so with that, we did receive an email from the neighbor that has the property that this window faces, their front yard, and they were supportive of staff's recommendation. And I do believe the applicant is here and wants to discuss the item as well.
Thank you. Does commissioners have any questions of the staff?
Oh.
No. The applicant's here. Would you like to address us?
Please.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is John Shank. My wife and I are the owners of the home here at 117 Saxon. It's kind of echoey. I first want to apologize in that I addressed the letter to you all incorrectly. I think it's too early in the year for the city's website to have updated, and you don't show as chair.
That's okay. Don't worry about that part.
My apologies. I want to thank staff, especially Katie and Brian, for their professional courtesy, caring, communication, helping us kind of work through the how did this happen sort of moment that we had a year ago or so. We appreciate staff's recommendation. We take no issue with it. Whenever this happened, we don't really know. We've tried to look and figure out when. I know that it's been a bedroom for at least 20 years, but we can't really figure out what happened before that. When we bought the home in 2007, we did what I think is pretty normal diligence. Our lender did diligence, the brokers, the seller's disclosures I looked through. Nothing. It's just been a bedroom. I think, commissioners, you guys may recall from a year ago or so, the second story side yard roof deck issue that was before you all, that sort of became this complaint about the privacy issue. And I think our request is that we not, frost or treat the window. I've looked at the street very carefully. There's not a second story south facing window that has a treatment, even all the way to Escalona. And then I looked around, I couldn't find frosted windows anywhere. As you saw in the photo, our window is over the front yard. It's not even at the house. And as I tried to point out in my letter, I thought, it's a beautiful new home. It's a brand new home, a few years old. And they cited it and floor planned it and all of those things, knowing, hey, there's that house with that bedroom window. Doesn't mean it's right. We're here because there's a lack of compliance and we want to get that corrected. But the light and air and the view, the peekaboo view that everybody loves to enjoy when they can, is something that we very much value, and we'd like to be able to keep that. I intended to provide a few extra photos if they were helpful. I happened to send you the same one multiple times. And I brought the few other photos if those are interesting or helpful. But with that, I'll stop. But I guess my one other request would be, if you do find that the right thing to do is to require the frosting, I mentioned to Brian, I was going to ask, I think in the recommendation, it says that we would do that within 7 days. And my request, for us to figure out what materials and procure them and get somebody and get it all done. These days, it feels like a miracle to get anything done in a week. But if we could have more time, or maybe tie it to there's a building permit process we're going to have to go through after this, and just tie the work together if you really think we need to do it. There's a part of me that worries that worries. I shouldn't be worrying about other people, but it does feel that in my homework of your city's municipal code, et cetera, when looking at the roof deck issues, it seemed that there were very, very clear categories of privacy expectations. And the front yard was the least expectation compared to backyards and side yards, et cetera. And I just thought, if anytime somebody gets a permit, if somebody can say, well, I don't like that one, we're going to have frosted windows all over the place. And I don't think it's great. Just as I noticed that there were none. But I'll stop there and of course, answer any questions if you guys have any. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Does anyone have any questions you want to ask the applicant now? Okay.
Thank you.
We will bring this item back to the commission for a discussion.
Is there anybody else in the public who wants to?
Oh, sorry. Is there anyone else in the pub? Thank you for reminding me. Anybody else in the public want to speak on this? Seeing no one, we'll bring it back to the commission. Is there all right. Who would like to start with this one?
You're looking my way, I'll be happy to jump in. So I think that the fact that we allow second stories in this community right off the bat is going to be a problem with privacy, because there's going to be very few second stories that don't have windows. And I was actually kind of surprised staff recommended the frosting, because that is, to me, is a slippery slope. This window does not look directly into anybody else's anything. It overlooks a yard, which, like, as he points out, all windows are going to overlook something. So I'm just hard pressed to see why we would put any conditions on that window, especially since, and this really doesn't apply, but I mean, it's an ocean facing window. And, that's why we're here, is we like to look out at it, even if it's a peak or even if it's the clouds, you want to look out, and if it inadvertently overlooks someone's rose garden and you want to bring out your binoculars and count their aphids, I suppose anybody could do that. But I just don't think this is something that we should put any conditions on, and I would support deleting condition 13 entirely.
Anyone else like to make any comments? Commissioner Christensen?
I agree with Commissioner Welk wholeheartedly. And I'm curious as to what, have we ever required anybody else, any other applicant to have frosted windows?
Yes, we have.
Within a setback? Okay, so can we see the site plan one more time? Just up. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I echo Commissioner Wilk's sentiments exactly.
Commissioner Jensen?
When you said that it's been required in other projects, can you elaborate on where that, generically where that's been and when that became an issue?
I can comment on that. So we have seen this on prior projects. I think typically it's been when a new house goes in next to an existing home and there's windows in close proximity for privacy, and also within bathrooms. We've typically asked that any bathrooms have the opaque.
Thank you.
No, I'll actually make a comment on this one. Peter and I don't often agree, but I agree with you on
Oh,
this.
there you go.
Clearly, this has been there for at least 20 years because the people have occupied the house that long. And so it's nothing new. And I could go along approving the application without requiring them to frost the window.
So with that, I'll make a motion to approve staff recommendations and with the deletion of condition 13.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, a roll call vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, so someone should let Paul know where he can come back in the room. So I'm gonna leave for this one, the one on,
Okay.
I have to recuse.
Okay.
Mhm. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is 1555 Lincoln Avenue. It's a design permit, historical alteration permit, and variance for an addition to a historical single-family residence and the demolition of a non-historic accessory structure. So
Thank you and good evening. So as mentioned, this application includes a design permit, historic alteration permit, and variance for a single-family residence. It's located at 1555 Lincoln Avenue within the single-family residential zoning district. This is the existing residence as it appears today, located within the Jewel Box neighborhood near Wharf Road. The applicant is proposing first and second story additions to the historic primary residence. The project would also, as mentioned, include the demolition of a large accessory structure in the rear yard that was constructed, in 1984. This is not historic. This is the proposed site plan. The additions shaded in blue are located in the back half of the structure. With the totaled first and second story additions, the proposed project equals 1,824 square feet for a floor area ratio or FAR of 57%, which conforms to the maximum FAR of 57% for the lot. The proposed parking are noted with those X's there, and we'll come to that at the end of this presentation. This is a rendering of the proposed design. I'll go ahead and go through a side by side of the existing and proposed elevations. Sorry, one moment. This is the front and east facing elevation. It is also the most publicly visible elevation. The bulk of those additions will replace a previous shed roof addition set approximately 24 feet back from the front wall. The exterior cladding on the additions are horizontal wood lap, which are differentiated using wider widths than the original cladding. This is the right north side elevation. This is the opposite side elevation. And this is the proposed and existing rear elevation. This is a photo from the assessor's records, circa 1975 of the home. You can notice a few differences here, such as the absence of a balcony fence. So some additional historic context. The residence was constructed around 1890 in the Greek Revival style. The home was modified in the 1920s with a rear shed roof addition and a 1970s conversion of the front porch covering into a balcony. In 1984, the city approved the construction of a large accessory structure in the back. It required a variance. The project was reviewed by architectural historian Seth Bergstein, who noted the structure retains numerous character defining features, including steep gable roof, original entrance.
I think your presentation is not going to Zoom.
Oh. Thank you. right, I think that should fix it. So the project was reviewed by architectural historian Seth Bergstein, who noted the structure retains numerous character-defining features, including a steep gable roof, original entrance with top light and side light windows, clapboard siding, and numerous wood detailings throughout the structure. The final design presented and proposed incorporates the summary of recommendations provided by Mr. Bergstein, which were focused on preserving the original openings, differentiation, and reductions to the new massing. Following the incorporation of those design changes, which are summarized above, Mr. Bergstein found the overall project in compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, as well as the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. As mentioned before, this project requires or includes two variances. One is for the parking dimensions of the covered space or the garage, as well as the non-conforming calculation or the structural alteration limitation of 80% of the fair market value. The 80% calculation based on the architect's submittal and staff's review was approximately 80%, but just in good practice, they opted to apply for a variance because it's just an approximation, and sometimes they change when we get to building. The proposed covered space measures 9 feet 5 inches wide by 17 feet 8 inches. 17 feet 8 inches deep, whereas they typically are required to have a minimum clearance of 10 feet wide by 20 feet deep. The specific considerations relating to this variance request include the unique circumstances of the historic status and the associated protections within the municipal code, as well as CEQA. Strict compliance with the non-conforming code would be contrary to the preservation of this structure, as the historic elements of it are also the ones that don't comply with code, namely the front and side elevations. Similarly, the reduction of covered parking dimensions reduces forward massing of the addition and enables the preservation of a forward first story window on the corner on the southeast elevation. The project also complies with all other zoning standards and meets the required number of on-site parking spaces. Similar exceptions have been granted in association with historic resources such as 124 Central Avenue and more recently 216 Central Avenue. Therefore, staff was able to make findings in support of granting the variance for both requests of the non-conforming calculation and the covered parking dimensions. Included.
Are you done? Oh,
Oh.
sorry.
Almost. Included in the application, no problem. The applicant is proposing to remove up to 6 trees, 4 of which are regulated within the city's forest and tree ordinance. They may not remove the entirety of those trees, but they're requesting the authorization to do so, just in case it's required for construction. The area of this sort of hedgerow of trees are indicated in orange above, and that line there to the south of the structure. The green are all the other trees that they're proposing to preserve, including the most notable oak tree in the front yard. Because of the remaining trees, staff does not believe that this property is likely to be under the minimum required canopy coverage, so we did not include conditions as pertaining to these removals. And with that, staff recommends approval based on the attached conditions and findings.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? The applicant here, would you like to speak to us?
I'm Tara Zorovich. We're the owners. Yeah, we just decided to follow the rules. we now live in a house that's bigger than this, but we really want to live here. So we were willing to just, downsize a little bit just to be closer to the beach. So yeah, we just followed all the rules in the garage. As Sean said, we just had to shrink it to satisfy the historical society. So I think that's it. And the house it's not in great condition. The wood is rotted, and so it definitely needs to be done. So anyway, I just wanted to thank Sean and Brian for their help with the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public or on Zoom that would like to comment on this? Okay, seeing no one, we'll bring it to the commission for consideration and deliberation. Would someone like to start?
No, I think it's a good design. I like the way you've differentiated the new from the old. The only thing I thought was a little strange, but I guess it's not historic looking at the record, is the second railing on the second story balcony is different than the fence on the first story. But looking at that picture from 75, that wasn't there anyway, so it doesn't matter. No, I think it's fine.
Commissioner Christensen.
I don't really have a problem with the request for the variance of the parking or any of that. I think that it serves its purpose. I had a question about the trees. Just clarification, I think. So they're requesting to remove the green, the on the plan you had the orange. So the orange is being removed slowly. Okay, and then the green is remaining.
Correct.
That's I have no problem with that. Thank you. Peter.
Okay, well, I don't have any problem with it either. I think they did a very nice job on their design to maintain sort of the historical character of the building while making it a bit more livable for them. So would someone at this end of the table like to make a motion on this
I'll
item?
motion to approve the project at 1555 Lincoln.
Okay, and that includes the historical alteration permit in the variance. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second on this project.
Aye.
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 Aye. So the next item is 517 Oak Drive, and I need to recuse myself from that. So Vice Chair Christensen will take over for this particular item.
All right, so item D. Oh, should I wait for Commissioner Weston? Item D, 517 Oak Drive. It's a variance for the required parking dimensions to construct a first-story additions without meeting current parking standards. The project is located in the R1 Single Family Residential Zoning District. Do you have a staff presentation?
Yes, thank you. So as mentioned, this application only includes a variance, does not include a design permit. It is located in the single family residential zoning district, in specifically the Riverview Terrace neighborhood. This is the existing residence as it appears today. To the right of it, I actually did speak with the neighboring property owner, and he asked that I just mention this, that they have a unusual shared driveway, so to speak. They are separate properties. They serve the separate properties, but they look contiguous, and that's kind of how they ended up here based on the unusual development pattern of these two separate lots. This is the proposed site plan. Except for the parking, the proposed additions comply with all development standards and would not require even a design permit due to the zoning code exemption for a residential addition not in excess of 400 square feet, not exceeding 15 feet in height, and located towards the rear of the structure. If a variance is approved, the applicant could apply for a building permit under this design permit exemption. As shown, the proposed additions would increase the existing structure by approximately 217 square feet. The proposed parking arrangement is shown above. This is what the structure would look like from the front. You can see that while the additions are located behind, there's some prominence over the existing residence. That said, the maximum height of everything, including that addition, is 13.5 feet. This is a rendering of the same remodel, but from the rear. The addition is on the left. And as proposed, the additions would exceed 10% of the structure's existing floor area, which means that the use's full parking demand must be provided, including the dimensions of those parking spaces. The use requires 2 uncovered parking spaces in a tandem configuration such as the one that exists and is proposed. That would mean 2 parking spaces that each measure at least 9 feet wide by 18 feet deep. The variance includes a proposal for 2 uncovered parking spaces that measure 7 feet wide by 16 feet 6 inches deep. For context, there's a parcel map above showing a 3-block area around here, around the surrounding neighborhood. Of all the lots visible above, only 6 lots are less than 40 feet wide, and only 1 lot is narrower than the subject property. The lot is also proportionally smaller than the other lots around it due to that narrow width. And Riverview Terrace lots are already among the smallest in Capitola's single-family neighborhoods, which is about, on average, 40 feet wide by 70 feet deep. This lot is 33.5 feet wide. The applicant also submitted photos of their 2 vehicles using the approximate area included in the proposal, so you can see what that would look like. The project will comply with, as mentioned before, all other zoning standards and meet the required number of on-site parking spaces. Therefore, staff was able to make findings in support of this variance request. And with that, we are recommending approval based on the attached conditions and findings.
Question. So your staff's rationale for the variance is basically the size of the lot for the parking variance.
Correct.
And do we have precedent on this? We've other Riverview Terrace where we've accepted smaller lots. It seems to me we've accepted a lot of them, but I don't want to be setting precedent here.
There is one example I can think of up on Depot Hill on Central Avenue on the side closer to the village, right before, there was, I can't remember the address for it, but it's a really small lot. It has a tan house on it that's about 1.5 stories, and they came in for a 2nd story addition towards the back, but they couldn't meet their parking requirement, and there was a variance granted there because of the size of the lot, but it was also tied to being historic.
I'm just channeling Ed Newman here because he always would say, well, why do we have requirements if we're going to have variances all the time? So I just want to make sure that we've got good rationale for the variance. And I think we do.
Well, look, beyond that, what did they do on the other 3 lots that are these skinny lots for parking? Do you know?
I can't tell you for certain. I'm guessing that, like many of the other properties along the Soquel Creek, one of the 6 that I starred on that parcel map is along the creek. I'm assuming it doesn't have parking. The majority don't in that section. One of the other properties shown is the neighboring property, which has it has the exact same non-conforming setup. And I'm not sure about the two flanking it on the opposing street, but
Thank you.
But to be clear, we're not losing any parking. It's just, right.
yes, it would still be 2 parking spaces provided that you accepted the arrangement.
Does the applicant want to come up and speak? Is the applicant here?
Hello, hi, I'm Mike Moore. I'm really just kind of here to answer questions. I bought the property with my wife back in 2003, and we cherish the village. We rented in 2 different spots prior to buying, and we have a 19-month-old boy now, and we are just humbly looking to add a bedroom, and have really. And I think our contractors actually might be available on Zoom, but we've been working very, very, very hard for quite a few years to find a solution here. Sean's been very supportive, as have the balance of staff, in kind of guiding us. And yeah, so I mean, just for clarity, we aren't losing any parking. We're maintaining exactly the status quo as is. We're demolishing a shed that's in the back and just adding a bedroom and a half bath back there in the back corner of the property. So I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, our contractor, we've been working with Taylor and his team for many years, numerous iterations to try to find a solution so we can just have 1 more bedroom. So we'd end up with a small 2-bedroom cottage. So I am happy to answer any questions. I've got lots of context for our very deliberate approach here. And again, our contractor can speak more technically to it. I'm not sure how since we haven't heard anybody present by Zoom yet, not sure how that's going to happen or if it needs to happen. Taylor, last name Darling. Okay, yeah, so he's prepared to speak to all this as well in case commissioners need further clarification. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
Do we come back to deliberation?
Other public comments.
Public comment, thank you. Is there any
Okay. Do I need to say something to him? Okay.
You're welcome to speak now.
Hello, can you hear me?
There you are.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Taylor Darling, and yeah, I've been working with Michael for a few years trying to come up with a solution for him and his wife to add 1 bedroom and a bathroom to their house. And we've been through a lot of iterations and run them by staff, and this seems to be the best solution that we can come up with. And just to give a little context, the house is very small. It's only 625 square feet. We are basically forced to do this variance because anytime you add more than 10%, you have to go through the variance, and 10% when you have 625 square feet is very small. So a normal size lot, this project likely would not even need the variance, but this lot is so small, there's really no other place to fit any even small addition. There's a setback in the back for sewer that constrains the lot. There's just nowhere else to go. And I think what we're asking for here to do a very small bedroom addition with a bathroom is, it's as efficient as we possibly could have done it. And Unfortunately, the parking, the width is narrower than normal, but without demolishing the house and moving it, there's no other way to meet the parking requirement. So yeah, we're asking for this variance in order to do a pretty small addition on the back of the property. And yeah, I'd be happy to ask any other questions. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we can turn it back to commission for deliberation. Does anybody want to have any comments?
I'll just go ahead and move to approve staff recommendation.
Second.
Aye.
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 Good luck.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Congrats. Thank you so much.
Okay, so the last item on our agenda tonight is a discussion of the citywide housing element.
Okay, thank you. This evening we have Brett Stinson of RRM Design and Veronica Tam of Veronica Tam and Associates Incorporated, who are going to, Veronica's going to lead the presentation this evening. I'm excited to introduce the two of them. There are experts in housing, and we've got a big job ahead of us this year of adopting a new housing element, which needs to be adopted by the end of the year, by December 31st. And we'll jump right into it, but we've got a lot of units that we need to figure out where they're going to go in Capitola in the future. And we've got a great team to work on this for us. So with that, Veronica, I'll let you jump in.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and you can see the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to go quickly to give an overview of the housing element, what we're doing, why we're doing this. And for tonight, regarding the housing element, mainly we're going to focus on some of the key issues and challenges that we have facing in updating the housing element and what are the next steps that we need to do. Housing element, part of your general plan, is one of the 7 mandated elements of the general plan, but it's very different in the sense that it has very strict regulatory requirements. We have to look at the needs in your community, not only the current needs of your residents, but also projected needs in the future. It also has a very tight deadline. We're dealing with December 31st, 2023 as the deadline of the housing element. Unlike the rest of your general plan that usually have a longer time frame, the planning horizon, the housing element has to be updated every 8 years. What is also different about the housing element is that it has to be reviewed by a state agency for compliance with state law. The agency we're dealing with is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, and you'll hear about HCD quite frequently over the next few months. The housing element, as we mentioned before, that has these particular requirements. We look at the needs, we update the programs and actions that you're going to undertake in the next 8 years, but it has to be reviewed by the state at 2 very critical stages. One, during the draft housing element. Prior to adopting the housing element, you must consider comments provided by the state. And then after the adoption, we have to also let the state review the housing element as whether they would consider overall the housing element be complying with state law. And throughout that process, we will have opportunities for the public to provide input on the housing element. Once you have adopted the housing element and is certified by the state, implementation will be throughout the next 8 years. Housing as I mentioned before, has very kind of like statutory requirements in terms of the content. We need to look at the needs in your community, but we also need to look at the constraints and opportunities that you have in addressing those housing needs. When it comes to constraints, the focus is on governmental constraints, and we will talk about that later on in future workshops. We also need to look at what you're able to accomplish over the last 8 years, what works and what doesn't work in your community, and how do we modify it in order to provide for a variety of housing types in your community through the Housing Action Plan. So what has the city been able to accomplish over the last 8 years? You actually did quite a bit and a lot of accomplishments over the last 8 years. Particularly, you updated the entire zoning code in order to accommodate mixed use into your commercial corridors. You have also adopted objective design standards for all multifamily mixed use development types. And then you also have prototypes of ADU design so that it will be plan ready, building plan ready, and easier for homeowners to pursue ADU construction. You have also provided an ADU guidance document as part of the implementation of ADUs. You updated the inclusionary ordinance to provide updated housing impact fees in order to generate resources for affordable housing. You have also implemented emergency shelter or emergency housing programs and rental assistance for lower income households. Also provided rehabilitation assistance to some of your lower income homeowners. When we sent the housing element to the state for review, the goal is to achieve something called a finding of substantial compliance with state law. It is very critical because the housing element is the most frequently litigated element of the general plan. When you do have a housing element that's deemed to be complying with state law by the state agency, then in the event of a lawsuit, you have the presumption of validity in courts. You also have the ability to pursue state funding, not only for housing, but infrastructure and transportation type of funding as well. When we send the housing element to the state for review, a critical component of that review is whether you have enough sites to accommodate housing growth in the future. If you're not able to have enough sites to accommodate your regional housing needs allocation, which I will go into a little further later on, that would not get you housing compliance, but more critical is that whatever you're not able to accommodate, it would be an additive to the next housing element cycle. But if you're able to provide the sites, that's your obligation. Production is not the obligation. The regional housing needs allocation is a production in terms of good faith effort, but it's not an obligation. Well, if you have a housing element that's out of compliance with state law, you would also see enforcement efforts from the state. Specifically, the state HCD has created a new division, housing accountability division, which will be monitoring jurisdiction for the compliance and enforcement of their housing programs. Just a little bit about Capitola today. I think before we start looking at your needs, some of the things that we need to kind of get an idea about is that currently your housing stock is generally split between single family and multifamily. You also have a fairly large mobile home stock. About 11% of your housing units are mobile homes. In terms of single family, 36%, but multifamily, that's apartment type of building, is a little bit lower at 16%. So while there is an even split, you are also leaning towards more the lower intensity type of housing. in terms of your current income distribution, when we look at housing programs, the state has defined income categories based on, in comparison to the area median income. The 5 different categories that we typically deal with in the housing element is the extremely low, very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income, based on comparison to the area median income, meaning the county's median income. For Capitola, your income distribution is leaning towards higher proportion in the moderate and above moderate income. About 63% of your households are between moderate and above moderate income. Another 37% or so that are very low and low income. In the last 10 years or so, in terms of demographics, so you barely increased in population by 20%. So not a very large increase at all. But in terms of your overall housing situation, you have also have more home ownership compared to 10 years ago, slight increase in home ownership. As we mentioned before, a critical component of the state's review of the housing element is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, RHNA. That is a top-down process from the state that estimate how much growth is needed in the entire state and allocated to subregions. In your region, the MBAG Association of Bay Area Government, Monterey Bay Area of Governments. So that's has about, I think, 3 or 4 counties included in that, with a 33,000 units overall allocation for the MBAG region. For Santa Cruz County, the overall allocation is 13,000 units or so. Capitola gets about 10% of that. Now, what is very important to also know is the fact that your regional housing needs allocation, RHNA, for the 6th cycle housing element is almost 10 times what you were allocated back in the 5th cycle. Due to a variety of reasons, one, the overall RHNA for the entire state is significantly higher than in the 5th cycle. 2, there is new state law that requires jurisdictions to look at the housing needs that from the past 20 years that have not been met. So you have to not only look at future growth needs, but you also have to compensate for lack of growth in the last 20 years or so. And then there are also new methodologies and factors that the state uses in order to calculate the allocation of units. Again, the regional housing needs allocation is divided into income categories. What is important to understand is it's not anticipated that you will have the ability to build all the units by these income categories. RHNA is a planning goal, not a production obligation, and the state uses density as a way to estimate what type of land use policies or zoning would be able to allow jurisdictions to accommodate the regional housing needs allocation by these income categories. We'll talk a little bit about that in terms of the density. Public outreach is a critical component of the housing element updates already as well. There is an ongoing housing survey to look at the needs in the community, and this city has also conducted stakeholder interviews. There are also additional workshops that have been planned throughout the process of updating the housing element. Today is one of the first meetings that we will go through in terms of study sessions, but we will have another one with the city council next week, and then a community workshop the following. So far from what we have done in terms of outreach, what we have heard a lot from stakeholders particularly is the need to streamline entitlement and permitting processes in order to encourage housing development. There's also critical ways to get housing built in the community is to work with nonprofits in order to provide housing that is needed for your lower income and certainly persons with special needs in your community. Also, opportunities for housing in Capitola probably lies primarily in the mixed use area. For example, in your Capitola Mall site, that probably would be one of the key sites for housing in the future. In identifying sites, the state has adopted a lot of new state laws to really regulate what constitutes feasible sites in developing housing for different income and for a different household type. What we have to do in the housing element is to make sure that we identify the sites, parcel specific, and explain how these sites are feasible for development and whether there are access to infrastructure and services, whether there are major environmental constraints, whether it will be able to facilitate a variety of types of housing, including multifamily, single family, and also senior housing and other types of housing. We absolutely need to identify a sufficient capacity. Without that, the housing element will not be certified by the state. So that is going to be a challenge in Capitola as a small community. And what we need to do when we are looking for sites is to certainly respect the city's future, the vision for the future. But in looking at that and in aligning with your current land use policies, look for opportunities for redevelopment, look for accessory ADUs development, and look at some other opportunities such as state-owned properties. And there is new state laws that govern housing on educational and religious institutional sites. So that we can go into a little bit of that in a little later. One piece of state law that again that talks about site inventory for the RHNA is the concept of no net loss. When we identify sites in the housing element and make an estimate about how much growth can be accommodated on those sites, it may not actually happen exactly that way if the site is developed. Even when the site is developed and is developed at lower density or fewer units than assumed in the housing element, or not exactly at the income level assumed in the housing element, the state requires the jurisdictions to do an ongoing accounting that you still continue to have the ability to accommodate your remaining regional housing needs allocation. And if you're unable to do that, you have to replenish your site inventory. And for that reason, the state actually recommends that when you identify sites in your housing element, you do create a buffer. You do identify a buffer between 15 to 30%. It's a recommendation, but we try to get to that as feasible as possible. Particularly the buffer is important for the lower income categories because most housing developed at market is not going to be affordable for lower income households. Congregational sites and educational sites. There's been two changes in state law. AB 1851 allows development of affordable housing for low income households on congregational religious institution properties. Basically, you can have a church or some other religious institution on site, but utilizing the parking area or other unused area, and they can provide housing on site, partnering with the religious institution, and they're not required to replace the parking that they took up to 50% of the original parking. AB 2295, that's brand new. Institutional, educational and institutional uses currently, for example, public schools, colleges, they have the ability to provide housing for their employees without requiring a zone change. That is new state law. So when we're looking at the sites inventory, certainly one strategy is to look at your ADUs. Now, unfortunately, at this point, we're seeing an increase in your ADU trend, but it's not increasing at a very high rate yet. But we are able to project based on the trend. Currently, we can project how many ADUs you can achieve over the next 8 years. So we can assume some housing production as ADUs in the future. We can also, as we mentioned before, look at the institutional or religious facility sites. That is becoming a very viable and very popular trend right now in California, is to have churches partnering with nonprofit developers who provide affordable housing. The example we're showing it here is in Garden Grove, where they're taking about two acres of the parking lot area of the church site and then providing 47 family housing and 16 units of senior housing. And in exchange for that, the church gets a new community center. They get programs and offices that they're on site for the residents, but then there are offices also for other local nonprofits. So this is one example, but there's been many examples now in California. When we look at the site inventory, given the magnitude of the arena, we really have to look at every corners of the city, trying to find out what would be the most appropriate places that would have the either vacant or underutilized properties that we can facilitate or encourage redevelopment. One thing is important to know is the state considers sites that are at least 20 units to the acre, that can accommodate housing that's at least 20 units to the acre, to be feasible for accommodating lower income. So as I mentioned before, the state doesn't expect you to actually build all the units at the income distribution is shown in the RHNA, but you do have to provide sites at appropriate density and development standards. And what is considered appropriate for lower income is about 20 units to the acre. So looking at the various zoning districts in your community right now, you do have a few that do accommodate 20 units to the acre, such as your multifamily high density is close to 20. Your mobile home park, although we're not seeing a lot of new mobile homes to be developed in these days. You have the affordable housing overlay and the village residential overlay that's up to 20 units to the acre that would be that can be used. You do have mixed use categories that have no density limit. But however, we do have to demonstrate to the state what is the trend of development in those areas, what is the average density yield. With that, we're going to actually have to look at possibly doing some kind of rezoning, because what you currently have is unlikely to be adequate to accommodate almost 1,400 units of RHNA. When you do the rezoning, there is a deadline. The statutory deadline of the rezoning is December 31st, 2023. You can go past the statutory deadline, but if you're able to do the rezoning prior to the statutory deadline of the housing element and prior to or at the same time as adopting your housing element, is that you will be able to avoid a lot of restrictions or requirements that's imposed on the city if you end up having to rezone properties after statutory deadline. One key thing is that we talk about 20 units to the acre being a default density as being feasible for facilitating lower income. If you have to rezone after the statutory deadline, then not only do you have to have a maximum at 20 units to the acre, you also have to have a minimum of 20 units to the acre, because you cannot have a zone district that has the maximum equals to the minimum. Therefore, your maximum will have to be pushed up to beyond 20 units to the acre. So most of the time, when that happens, the range would become 20 to 25 units to the acre or 20 to 24 units to the acre.
Could you repeat that? I didn't follow your.
Okay,
all that.
so yeah, the zoning district that you need to, or the zoning density that you need to facilitate lower income is 20 units to the acre. If you're able to rezone adequate properties to accommodate your lower income RHNA, you can have a zone that it says 0 to 20 units to the acre. But if we're unable to achieve the rezoning prior to the statutory deadline, that particular zone cannot be 0 to 20 anymore. It has to have a bottom of 20 units to the acre. So because you cannot have a zone that the bottom is 20 and the maximum is also 20, then you need to push up the maximum to be something else. So then your zone to accommodate your lower income RHNA would have to have a density range of 20 to 24 or 20 to 25, 20 to 25 units to the acre. So the maximum density of that zone would have to be pushed up because you now has to establish a minimum of that zone at 20 units to the acre.
Okay, thank you.
And there is also another requirement that the sites that you can qualify for lower income sites, even if you have the adequate zoning, the site has to be large enough to accommodate at least 16 units. So you cannot include a bunch of smaller sites to accommodate your low income RHNA. You must find sites that can be consolidated to a point where at least 16 units can be achieved on those sites. Also, another thing that is critical is the by right approval. If the rezoning occurs after the statutory deadline, then if a project comes in with 20% affordable to lower income, then the project would be eligible for by right approval. And by right approval under state law is ministerial review or no discretionary review. No CEQA, no public hearings. So that's the requirement if you're unable to rezone what you need before the statutory deadline.
So Veronica, I'm just going to take a moment and say, so we thought we just had to update our housing element, but this is a really a big piece so that we can avoid these other obligations. So
Yeah,
this will be going through and just tracking these at the same time and hoping to have our densities updated by that December deadline so that we won't be subject to all these by right approvals and other stipulations. So I just want to highlight that because that this is new state law that's come out and new requirements.
So do you not only have to have the city approve it, but does it have to have Coastal Commission approval before December?
It does. So I believe so. That's a great question, but I'm thinking it has to be in place. So that means we have to have it certified by Coastal. So this is going to be one of our first stops and we'll get into this in the future slides, but is really looking at our densities and starting that process right when we thought we had an updated code, but we'll be coming back with modifications. Because we have areas without any density limits, and now we have to cover ourselves for, we should have density limits because otherwise we'll be subject to the lower and upper ends of density limits. So, okay, continue. Thank you.
Great. And another thing that is important to have the zoning done as well, because we're most likely going to rely heavily on mixed-use properties for your low-income RHNA, which essentially higher density development. If you don't have the zone in place or the site in place at the time, then rezoning to mixed use to allow mixed use development requires that you allow standalone residential in those mixed use sites. And that if a mixed-use project does happen on those mixed-use sites, you cannot require more than 50% of the residential, more than 50% of the floor area to be non-residential. That is if you rely on rezoning, and of those rezoning, more than half of your lower income comes from mixed-use zoning. So that's another wrinkle that we have to deal with in terms of identifying sites and trying to strategize about rezoning. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Katie. She's going to run through some of the available sites and get your input on what those what should the city's strategies be. Katie?
Thank you. So here is the map that's included in our 5th cycle housing element, and it's identifying the previous RENA sites. And noted on here is the Terra Court development of 11 units on 38th Avenue, which shows is developed. And then also the entitlement of the hotel on Hill Street, which we went through the process of no net loss previously. So when we allowed the hotel, we had to find other sites to make sure that we could still fill our RENA obligation. And we used the sites of 4401 Capitola Road, and then another site on 38th Avenue right next to the rail trail or the rail. So we're familiar with that action of having to have additional sites in order to allow different projects come in that don't quite meet the numbers we'll tie to RENA. Next slide, please.
So can I ask a question on that? So there's something that we're in the middle of approving or disapproving now, this high density thing on Capitola Road. So if that was part of one of our sites for high density housing, and as she pointed out, you have to constantly update to see, okay, so now it was developed, but if the density wasn't appropriate, then you have to have a buffer. You say, okay, that wasn't enough. So now we have to find another area that will accommodate the higher density.
Correct. So if in our no net loss for the hotel, we had placed, I'm going to say 20 units on the 4401 site. And if that application got developed at 10 units, we would have to find, to meet the no net loss, we would have to find another site that could accommodate the 10 units so that we can still meet our RENA obligation within the city limits.
So the 4401 is the one that's the Capitola Road, the one we're talking about. And so that in fact does meet the density allocation that you had assigned it when we did the hotel?
I believe it does, yes.
Because I would hate to think.
It must, but we'll make sure of that.
Okay, yeah, because
Sure.
I think you need to make sure of that.
We need to make sure of that. So, so this is now thinking forward of where are we going to look at potential sites. So at this point, we have more public outreach. We've got our survey online. We did stakeholder meetings back in November. We're also planning on the 16th to have a public outreach meeting via Zoom. So we'll be getting that flyer out, I'm hoping by Monday, and circulating that. We're letting the Planning Commission know and the City Council, and we'll be getting that on our social media. But what we've heard in general so far from the stakeholder meetings is when we're talking about future sites, really looking at, and what our general plan has talked about, is looking at that 41st Avenue corridor. So on this slide, you're seeing the area in kind of the darker red peach color includes the Capitola Mall and 41st Avenue north of Capitola Road. And south of Capitola Road, so that's the regional commercial zone. And then south of Capitola Road is the community commercial. And one strategy we can utilize here is really looking at the whole zoning district and whether or not we want to take an approach of looking at the whole zoning district and assigning RENA numbers kind of to any to most properties that could be redeveloped due to their age and availability of open space on the lot. Another approach you can take in your RENA calculations is identifying kind of what we did with our last update, is identifying very specific properties and allowing them higher densities and probably higher height limits to get there. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So on the 41st Avenue corridor, you're seeing these are the, so the north and south of Capitola Road sites. So again, I just went over that, but those are the two zoning districts along 41st Avenue, really starting to look at mixed use there and the potential for more density all along within those zoning districts. Next slide, please. Another site that always comes up in these conversations, you can remember we had a conceptual review at the mall with 637 new units proposed and mixed use. When we're thinking about potential sites, we also have to think about incentivizing redevelopment. This is a huge site in which it plays a very important role with our commercial and future residential. So we don't want to overburden sites that really are in need of redevelopment. So there's going to be a lot of fine tuning to this because it's a huge site. It can hold a lot of housing. How we distribute the differentiation of what types of affordability on this site, we really have to be really thoughtful about, because at the same time, we want to make sure that the developer that comes in to redevelop the site isn't overburdened by our future housing needs here, because it plays a very important role in economic development as well.
So when you select a site, do you need to make sure that it is a candidate for redevelopment soon? For example, you couldn't pick a site that was just developed and you knew it wasn't going to get changed for another 30 years. You'd have to evaluate it and say, this is kind of old, dilapidated or whatever, or how would you make that?
So if we went, we'll take Terra Court for an example. Terra Court it's 11 townhomes. It's at 2 stories. If we were to take that to the HCD and say, oh, well, this is in our incentivized zone and we'll allow them to go to 5 stories, they most likely are not going to accept that site. They're going to say, you developed that in the last, they're going to look at, for each site, they'll look at when they were last developed.
Okay.
So they will be combing through this. So that site most likely would not make the list. Whereas the mall.
Yeah, okay.
Prime, but okay, next slide, please. And then I'll let you take this one, Veronica. Okay. Anything to add?
Yeah, actually, great question from the planning commissioner. When you adopt a housing element, there is under state law, you have to make a finding because we're relying on underutilized sites and not vacant sites for most of our regional housing needs allocation. You have to make a finding that based on a variety of factors that we use in selecting the sites, that there is substantial evidence that the existing uses are not going to impede future development, and that you have the ability to like that has the potential to be redeveloped for the next 8 years. So that finding has to be incorporated as part of your adoption resolution. So that's something to keep in mind. Giving you an example of how we have to calculate capacity. This is a site that currently has 3 parcels and it's zoned CC and currently being used as commercial, but it's a single story kind of commercial use, restaurant and some other uses, but has very, very, very large like surface parking area that can be considered as underutilized. So if we were to rezoned it and then allow for housing, there are many different ways that you can redevelop this. You can and you can just develop on the parking area. You can incorporate the existing uses to do adaptive reuse, or you can and you can build brand new things, and then with existing uses moving back into you know, the commercial space as well. But in estimating the capacity, one thing we have to look at is realistic capacity. Meaning that just because you zoned it at 20 units to the acre or 30 units to the acre, in this case, we just use the assumption of 30 units to the acre, you cannot, under state law, you cannot just use the maximum density to estimate your capacity. You can only use realistic capacity based on your trend to estimate capacity. At this this particular example, a 1.5 acre site, at 30 units to the acre, if we were to redevelop the entire site, we estimated based on only a 70% of achievement, like average density, so about 21 units to the acre. And so that would yield about 31 units. So every single property that we estimate, we have to take that discount factor based on the fact that currently very few projects in your city are developed at the maximum density. And something that even for your commercial corridor, some of your commercial properties that says no maximum, if we can only demonstrate an average of 20 units to the acre, that's probably what we can use to estimate capacity. But I think most likely we're seeing lower than 20 units to the acre on your commercial property. So that's something to keep in mind. What we can, so it may be helpful to have actually a maximum and some kind of a minimum, maybe in looking at density range at appropriate locations.
So the good there is we've got Capitola Beach Villas at 30 units per acre. So that helps us say we've accomplished this in the past. Thank you.
Right, but on the mixed use parts, what's our historical trend there?
So that actually is a mixed use.
That is considered, oh, okay. Okay, so that's okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Veronica.
Okay, so I think what we certainly want to hear from you is what are the primary issues in updating the housing element that you want us to reflect in the housing element and also pay special attention to? What are the areas or sites that you think are appropriate to be included in the site inventory? And there are any other issues and topics that it's important for us to consider as part of the housing element update. So,
can I have a question? So you talked about the site that you showed us, the potential site on Capitola Road, and it was 1.5 acres. And you were saying that that could equal 31 units. Does that take into account parking? Because the project that we were looking at on Capitola Road was 38 units, I think on less than an acre, which is, a higher density. I mean, I don't understand how it works. If it works in, the scenario where someone can come in and propose something and they don't have to provide parking. But when we're proposing it in our housing element, do we have to provide parking?
So
go ahead, then Katie. Yeah.
You can go ahead.
No, I think when we look at the housing element, when we look at the sites, we don't know what developers are going to come in and propose. They can do small units and get a higher density. They can get really large units. They can have density, but definitely the city does have parking requirements in most cases. And so what the housing element does, and when we estimate it, we try to be as conservative as possible. using an average density. That would include parking, providing parking as well. But that what we are estimating the potential based on average density in order to minimize the no net loss situation that you will experience in the future. So, but when actual projects come in, they can go higher, they can go lower.
Okay, thank you.
So
Our next step here will be analyzing this. We'll be looking at the city at maps and looking at sites and bringing to you, we'll be looking at the sizes of parcels, the ages of buildings, where they're located. And I think what we're really looking for tonight is we know there's a lot more study to be done, so we're not asking for specific sites. We just want to hear back in general, are you supportive of us looking at our mixed use areas? Is the focus on 41st Avenue where we've kind of put in incentives in our zoning code? Would you like us to really focus on that, the commercial corridor, as well as looking at ADUs within our single families and also maybe revisiting the density limits within our multifamilies so that we're that's kind of where we're headed, and then we'll be coming back with maps on specific sites and what we could really accomplish with that, taking that first step. And so it'd be looking at our commercial centers and what capacities we could place for mixed use above existing commercial, considering ADUs within single family and starting to project based on trends. And then also looking at our multifamily zones and the existing densities there and whether or not we'd have to increase the densities to get to be able to say that those could be redeveloped.
Seems like one opportunity we might have is we do have some multifamily projects in Capitola that are fairly old. And we have some multifamily projects that are in need of, rehabilitation, like the fourplexes up on 46th and 48th. And I'm wondering if we can include some of those based on the age of those residential units that they're going to be needed to be redeveloped. I like the idea of the commercial corridor, but I think we ought to look at everything.
Yeah, I would be wanting to lean more heavily on what you just said then, rather than the commercial corridor, just from a former treasurer's standpoint. We get our income from sales tax and TOT tax. So to start suddenly turning businesses into residential areas, it affects our bottom line. So yeah, I would tend to lean towards renovating existing multi-unit areas and increasing the density there.
But in the commercial area, I think we're talking about more of a mixed use, so the commercial would stay there. We're not talking about reducing the amount of commercial space. Okay. We're talking about doing, commercial and residential all in one project, similar to what they were proposing on the mall.
Residential over retail kind of a thing. Yeah.
And I thought your comments about the mall are right on point, because we absolutely want that site to be redeveloped, because it is one of the big financial pieces that makes this city operate. And so we do have to be careful that while we may give them a fairly large number of units, trying to give them all very low income units would be a real deterrent for them to be redeveloping that site. So it's sort of a balancing act.
Can I ask a very basic question, which is the RHNA number itself? So from what I understand is that Santa Cruz County was given this 12,800, whatever that number was. And that was just allocated, right? We didn't have any input that came from the state. Where did that? So that came, so let me just finish. So that came from somewhere. And then that was allocated by AMBAG, I guess. Right. Split up by some equation, which I would like to see. But so, yeah, where did those numbers come from?
Okay. So the state allocated certain numbers to each metropolitan region. So AMBAG, we received 30.
We can't question those numbers.
33,000. So yeah, so the AMBAG, we received 33,000. You can't really question that number. That came down from the state. We were assigned that. If you could go back. So then at AMBAG, the board, they've gone through multiple durations of how to split those numbers up based on guidance from the state. And there's more guidance now than there has been in the past. So first off, the number has tripled. The original number from AMBAG, I think the last round was probably around 10,000. That number tripled. Then when they started dividing up between Santa Cruz, San Benito, and Monterey, they looked at different.
So was that a political decision and we had representation, or is that a hard formula?
It's a formula that AMBAG and the board accepted. It's a negotiated decision at the board.
And we had representation on that AMBAG, and we felt that we had proper representation on that board.
It's a negotiated decision, but it has to be approved by HCD. So there's Fair Housing Act is tied to it. Because we're a high resource city and we have a lot to offer in terms of schools and parks, and we've got great amenities, that also required us to take on more housing because we have something to, we're a high resource city. Also because we're a high income city, we had to take on more than other cities. So it's interesting when you see the breakdown between Capitola and Watsonville. Watsonville is much larger than us, and it's a bigger city. It has a much higher population. And we're at 1,300 units, and Watsonville's at just over 2,000.
Yeah, so it makes you wonder to what extent existing density was considered, because if there's no more room, then like Watsonville's a big place.
Yeah.
So was that part of the equation, or again, was this just a political negotiation, or is there an algorithm that we can look at and say, hey, here's an error here, like you did the other day on the consultants thing it's like, oh, hey, they got a number wrong here. That's not the mean income of our families, that,
So at this point, there's no changing these numbers. It did go through, it went through the AMBAG process. It was appealed, and those appeals did not win. So none of the numbers were
that ship has sailed.
Yeah, so that ship has sailed. I am happy at any point, if you want to come in, I can break it down for you exactly how we were assigned our numbers. We were very active in this process. We wrote quite a few letters to the AMBAG board, and you're spot on in that it really did not consider our land area. The only things that were considered really tied to land area were like fire and sea level rise were two items of risk determination that some numbers were deducted for our city because of our close proximity to the water and flooding. And also, but fire, other places such as Scotts Valley had numbers deducted for fire because they have more fire risk. So, but in the HCD's eyes, if you live in a dense city, that's, and we're trying to decrease vehicle miles traveled and become more sustainable, that's where more housing belongs. So that, that's really, when we say we don't have vacant space, we
also know we're not near a transportation corridor. So high density doesn't make sense unless we're in Santa Cruz or a high density transportation hub.
But yes,
right.
So it's like, we're not,
argue that, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where we're at now, but I'm happy to meet with any of you to walk through that. There's 5 different factors that go into the equation, and we did participate with letters from City Council to AMBAG during that process. And we sent in a letter against it, but we did not appeal, knowing that the outcomes of these appeals has almost no chance. So.
Okay.
And a question for you about the community outreach and stuff that's been going on. like we all were at the last meeting, talking about the project on Capitol Avenue. How is that community outreach being handled? And, can you elaborate that? Because I think that's where, us as a community, we need to talk about, because like it comes all the way back to that project, and then we talked about Pacific project. And then at that meeting, we all talked like our hands are tied from different standpoints, but it's all interconnected back to this. And so I think this is an overall, educating our community on where we are and what the mandates are and where our hands are tied. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on how that's being handled in the past and going forward. And,
Veronica, do you mind bring up this slide of next steps? I think it was, or public outreach. So right now, we've had an online survey that's been posted out, I want to say since November. So we're getting comments back on that, and we have it up on our website. We have a web page dedicated to the housing element update. We did our stakeholder interviews. And right now we're just, let's see. So in the continuing public outreach opportunities, this is really our kickoff tonight at Planning Commission, and we're doing the same meeting with City Council next week. We're one of 3 things, I believe, on the agenda. So it will really take the focus of that night. And from there, so we'll have a flyer that gets posted next Monday, letting the public know that our first community workshop will be February 16th at 6:30 p.m. It's going to be via Zoom. I've talked to a lot of other community development directors in our region, and everyone's doing these meetings through Zoom. I guess it's been really well received that way. People can interact from home, and so it has been a successful forum. The second community workshop will happen once we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, Veronica, but I think it happens once we have our first draft. And that's really when we expect, I think, the majority of the people to come out as we start identifying these sites, and people have more of a relationship to their home and where the sites are and relative to their home and parking and all of these things that we've seen. So I'm expecting the first work session to be attended, but I think once we have that first draft out, and that's what I've heard in the past, is that's really when the public will.
How's your response level been so far to date, like with some of the outreach and I'm not asking for an exact number, but have you been happy with it?
So the stakeholder interviews were well attended. That was an invite. We came up with, I want to say, 8 different stakeholder groups, from businesses to religious organizations to the school district, to a resident group. So those were well attended. I don't know where we are in terms of how many people have filled out this survey, but I think that will get more traction as we get the word out about the February 16th meeting. The storm kind of threw us back on some of this. We were hoping to do these kickoff meetings back in January, and then that 16th meeting would have fallen probably 3 weeks behind our launch dates. But we'll get it out there. We'll have Chloe and Julia helping us post it on the website and get the word out to the public. But
as we get numerous emails about projects that we're just getting right now, that should be automatic beginning of making sure those people are very informed about being invited to the first round of meetings, right?
We could add that to the bottom of our emails for getting that messaging out there.
And then another question, it's going to come down to a certain point, I think, right, at city council level, if I'm correct, that we talked about, mall development, from the impacts of having tax revenue to having housing, right? And how that, if the community decides, or city council under direction, and it's going to focus that's on the 41st corridor, or if it's going to go out to the multifamily, that's really going to come down to a decision that, it's going to be a why at a certain point that you're going to have to kind of design or give some guidance very strongly on what the mall or the 41st corridor is going to look like, compared to how, if that is a certain direction that we're going to keep those numbers low, then it's going to impact more of the community in other neighboring areas. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll be looking at that.
So I've got a question about your, how you're selecting these units. Are you sticking to the 20 units per acre? Or are you thinking, well, I will do 40 units per acre over here and then only, how do you select those sites from a density standpoint?
So you've heard from Veronica tonight, and earlier I introduced Brett. Brett is kind of specialized in looking at the maps and the GIS and all the layers underneath. And so he's going to be our wizard in the background, looking at the size of a lot, the age of a building, how much developable space is available on that lot, and starting to play around with densities. So we have to get to that. Not only do we have to get to the special number of the 1,300, I'd like to see us exceed that so that we can allow developments to come in that are under the requirements. So getting that number to probably 1,500. So Brett's he'll be looking at that and doing the wizard work behind with GIS. And that's what we'll be bringing to you, is where they're, and as, Veronica Tam has had a lot of experience getting approvals of housing elements done in the past. So we'll be really leaning on their expertise and their guidance in this, and then working with the Planning Commission and City Council and the public to really get feedback of where to direct this. So it's going to be those two elements of the experts knowing what sites are best, and then us knowing our city best and finding that balance between the two.
It's going to be a bitter pill for
It
the
is.
community to swallow, because we're talking about adding 25% more to our town. And we're not talking about adding 25% more to our water supply, to our streets, to anything else. And, the character of Capitola has always been this sort of small beach community. And, the state sort of saying, you don't get to have that anymore. We have decided that you need to be a different kind of town. And so it's going to be hard, but it's going to be something, we're going to have to do if we want to continue to function as a city, because we live under state laws.
Yep.
So
This will be a
So there were, it was reported, there were 109 municipalities. This is a question for Veronica. 109 municipalities in the state had to be approved by the end of January. Only 20 were approved by HCD. What are the consequences of not being approved? And then the follow-up to that is, how do you get approved if the success rate is 20% or less, actually?
That is certainly one of the challenges that we have to face. The HCD's review of the housing element is extremely rigorous. Ultimately, they'll get approved. It just may take time. And I'll give you an example. Even in Southern California, Skag region, their housing element was due October 15, 2021. As of now, there are still less than 50% of the housing elements that's approved in the Skag region, and they have 198 jurisdictions in the Skag region. A lot of times you need to go through multiple reviews with the state. If you do not get certified by the deadline or the 120 days that would allow you to do the rezoning, take a longer time to do the rezoning. You just continue to work with the state, but in the meantime, you will not be eligible for state funds such as the PLHA, public local policy housing. I can't remember the acronym. PLHA is the funding that came from SB2 before, and that's something that is you're entitled to receive it. If you have a certified housing element, all you have to do is ask. If you're permanent local housing allocation, PLHA. if you don't have a certified housing element, you will not be eligible to apply for that round of housing funds until you are. There are other like housing trust funds, there are funding for ADUs, there are fundings for affordable housing development. Those you're just going to be not eligible until you do. There is also the risk that you might have heard about builder's remedy, that if you don't have a certified housing element, then you cannot deny a project based on the fact that they are not complying with your general plan of zoning policies. So that's what builders remedies are. You cannot deny a project based on using that finding. But our goal is to get to an adopted housing element before the end of the year, before the statutory deadline, which if you self-certify you're complying with state law, then you can avoid builder's remedy at that time. But ultimately, you want to continue to work with the state until you get to a certified housing element. Katie mentioned a bit before that, I do have a very high success rate with getting housing element certified. I believe out of the 45% of the housing elements in the Southern California, at least 25% came from me. 25% of the 45% came from my group. So we always have a way to get you there. Have a certified housing element. The point is well taken that it is going to be a bit uphill. There are hard decisions that the Planning Commission and City Council have to make, and it's a matter of making also the state understand your situation and try to come up to a negotiated kind of agreement on what is within state law that you still have to do, but what can have some flexibility.
Okay, I think that wraps up our slide presentation.
Would it be possible, I thought there was some really valuable information in the slide presentation, for us to get a copy of that?
Yes. Veronica already sent me a PDF, so
Okay.
I will send that off to you.
Great.
Katie, did you want to look at the next steps slide?
So that would be perfect. And then we do have one member of the public
Okay.
here. I'm not sure if we have anyone on Zoom, but for next steps, so this is the other, timing is everything, right? With this, to get it done in time. Once we'll be proceeding with the sites analysis and bringing that back to you. We'll be producing our draft housing element document and housing programs. We're hoping to have this to you as early as late March, early April. So we can get our 30-day public review period started, where we get this out to the public, and then we'll hold that second study set. We'll hold a study session and do some more public outreach at that point. After the 30-day review period, we have 15 days to respond to the comments. And then we will send it to the HCD, and they get 90 days to review it. So right there, we've lost 4 months, a little over 4 months. And we are in February right now, so we've got 10 months. So HCD will review it. They have a 90-day period. And once they get comments back to us, we'll start moving through the public hearing process, which will be early fall, is what I'm expecting. We'll get the comments back probably at the end of the summer, having our public hearings in the fall, and then the statutory adoption deadline is December 31st. So that means that our city council has to have adopted the housing element update by December 31st. So
We do have one member of the public. Should we ask, would you
Well,
like to
just
comment?
One question on the schedule, Katie, while he steps up. The coastal commission review starts when in that whole process?
So that would be a separate process. If we want to update our density, and which we should, because then
Gonna
we're
have to.
protected, that's a separate process. So typically from the time we, well, it's going to be at least 6 months from the time that we start that with planning commission to the time, 6 months is optimistic for certification by the coastal commission. So we will start plugging down the road, because I think I'm seeing from the planning commission that you'd like us to try that. The hurdles we can run in there is related to CEQA, because as we go through this analysis, if we have any CEQA studying to do, or that also takes time. So.
Hi, guys. Bear with me. I'm terrible at public speaking. To answer Peter's question, if I recall correctly, Kristen Brown was the president of AMBAG when this was all done. So we had a city councilor was the leader of the group that assigned these to us. So we really had that. I'd like to just talk about how serious the builder's remedy is. It hasn't been used a ton, but if we get to that point, the groups involved these days, this is a whole new cycle, they are ready to use the builder's remedy, especially in towns like this. We are right on the top of the list. I'd also like to talk about trends and findings. She wants to get to 1,500 because everything gets lowered. Because we didn't build for 20 years, it's one of the reasons we have such a big number right now. And that means our trends are very, very low. And that's going to make everything so much harder for us. And that's really all I would like to say. I would like to talk about the residential flex zone on Portola that the county is going to do. Do we not have the option to pull something like that off, or is it not useful to us, or? Okay, well. That's all I got, guys. Thank you so much. And really, good luck. I do not envy you.
Okay.
So just one, I'm sorry, one other question. Can you, have we, when we're looking at this and everything, have we heard anything from the mall developer, anything recently or anything?
The latest from the mall developer is that they've been focusing their energy on a larger project, I think up in Alameda currently. So where they have much higher densities and height limits. So that's what I know at this point. So we'll be, in terms of the mall, we plan on, as we start talking about the budget update for the next budget cycle, we'll be talking with our city council about our goals. And that's one item that I'm planning on bringing to city council, is starting to talk about redevelopment of the goals and different avenues we can take in order to get there. So.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone have anything else on this item? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. And this is going to be exciting.
Thank you, Brett and Veronica.
Thank you.
So where are we on our agenda? We're at the director's report. Do you have anything else?
I just want to remind you that from here on out, our meetings are starting at 6 p.m. So we'll see you here at 6 p.m.
Commission communications? If not, our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Actually, seriously, that's the funny part.